Now let's add some plugins to the master section, and by default, Wavelab Pro installs one plugin for you, which is the new Master Rig. Master Rig is a really powerful set of mastering processors built into one plugin. However, you should be aware that up until now, if you haven't turned the Master Rig off and the power button is on in your master section, then all of the files that you've listened to now are actually going through that Master Rig and its associated processes and settings. So they probably added this one plugin of Master Rig to load by default just to show new users that there's a brand new plugin that they can use for mastering. But just be aware that if you don't want to have that Master Rig applying the processing to your files when you're working on it, you'll either need to turn off the master section or remove the plugin or use that reset command to reset the master section back to default. So now let's talk about adding plugins. Here are the effects slots, and these are where you add the plugins. So to add a plugin, you right or control click on these slots. By default, we're looking at 3 individual slots. You can add more slots by clicking this little button to add other processes to the plugin chain. So let's go to this first slot and right or control click, and that brings up that plugin list. And so what I'm going to do is go to the Steinberg folder, and I'm going to go to the mastering section and call up Master Rig. And when I select that, it brings up the Master Rig control panel. Master Rig has a whole bunch of different processors in it, including different dynamic processors, equalizing processors, saturation effects, and imaging. And if you're not really sure how to use and program all of the processors in the Master Rig, there are some really great presets up here in the preset window. So you can come to the factory presets and choose these, and we'll do that in just a moment. But let's talk about a couple of the other controls in this window, because all of the plugins that you load will have these same options. You can close the window by clicking this little button, but then if you want to reveal the control panel again, come over and click on the slot that has the plugin that you want to reveal. And then there's a bypass button on this window as well. So if you wanted to hear the processing before and after, you could use the bypass button here. And another nice thing is if this control panel is closed, or any control panel, you could come over to the master section itself, regardless of whether the control panel is open or not, and there's a bypass button for each slot. And if you had even more plugins applied and you wanted to hear the before and after, just use the power button up here on the master section to bypass all of the processing. And so now let's listen to some of these mastering processes, and I'm just going to be quiet and call up some factory presets, so I'll get some playback started on this loaded audio file, and then I'm going to come up here to the presets window and go to the factory presets, and let's load a few of these different presets. Let's start with smooth and warm. So once you've made some programming settings here, you could certainly come up to the preset window and save your own presets. Now, if you wanted to use more plugins, it's just a matter of coming over to the slots and choosing a new plugin. However, because the signal flow is top to bottom, if you wanted to use something before another loaded plugin, what you'd need to do is make some room for it. So I'm going to click and drag the master rig to slot number 2. Then I can right or control click on a slot and call up a different processor. For example, if we wanted to use the multiband compressor instead of the multiband compressor in Master Rig, let's just load that into the first slot so that the signal flow hits this compressor first, then flows into the next plugin. If we wanted to add resampling to change the sample rate, that's done in the next slot right here, which is dedicated to just the resampling plugins. So let's click on it and choose the preferred sample rate that we want to use when we export or render this file down. But I'm going to turn that off right now because I won't be doing any resampling. The master level faders are important because they establish what 0 dB is on the audio file. And one of the tricks to this is that some people mistake these faders for their studio monitor level controls. And that's wrong, because what will happen is when you adjust the faders, it's going to apply the fader settings to the rendered file. So a lot of people will use this to set their speaker levels, and then they'll apply the rendering, and they'll wonder why all their renders are so quiet. And so make sure that these faders are always set to the 0 position before you do any rendering. And then the next plugins are used for final effects and dithering. So if we wanted to apply a different plugin for dithering other than the iZotope, let's right or control click here. Let's go to the Steinberg folder and call up the UV22HR dithering plugin. And then we could set that to a 16-bit output. For example, if these were going to go to an audio CD, then we can close that window. And that completes the programming to the master section, but I am going to show you one other thing. If you wanted to get rid of any processing in your signal flow, you could right or control click, and at the very top of the window, you could remove the plugin. And if you already had a bunch of plugins loaded and you wanted to make room for one at the top, then you could hit Shift All Plugins down, and that would make a brand new slot for you. So now that we've programmed the master section, let's render it in the next tutorial.